Hello again, book lovers, and welcome to this review of a classic published in 1948 by Joseph Campbell. It's a study of comparative religions. It's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, famous for inspiring George Lucas to write his extended mythological Star Wars series. And I would have to say I enjoyed this book as much as I enjoyed Star Wars. That is to say, I didn't. It's a book that's been talked about. I've heard about it for so long, and thinking that maybe as a little annex to my historical investigations, let's take a look at some of the mythologies. Now, this book is kind of sold as an explanation of the hero's journey. It's a work of comparative folklore, mythology, religion, etc., along the lines of the Golden Bough, which I also somehow struggled to the end of, and the White Goddess, which was inspired by Mr. Fraser's work, which also found very, very difficult. And let's face it, the White Goddess is pretty speculative, personal folklore, almost inventing something from nothing. That's in my opinion, of course. As for this book, well, I was so totally unsurprised by it. Maybe this is arrogant to say. There's nothing that you couldn't work out for yourself just by being familiar with a few, I don't know, Eskimo, North Indian, Viking, Egyptian myths. It seems quite obvious that yes, there are similarities, but heck, there are a lot of differences. And that's where the underlining theory of this book comes unstuck, I fear. We get a lot of things like, in this part the hero will overcome some impediment, and he will be helped by some other god in the form of a bird, or perhaps a rabbit, or perhaps an elephant, and perhaps he might not break through, perhaps it's not him really, etc., etc. I have to say, when I read religious texts, which were obviously aimed at oral transmission with a lot of repetition, I do find my eyelids drooping. The power of the word can only go so far these days. And admittedly, I enjoyed the creation myths of the Buddhist countries where they talk about the 4-mile-high giants, which were in a terrible state compared with the 8-mile-high giants. The oft-recurring idea that the whole of the universe and the earth is a giant body, like in the Viking tale of Ymir, where the trees are his hair, and the whatever it is are his. And that's another thing, you see. They keep saying, and his thigh was pierced by this, and so that's why you get that constellation in the sky. And I can't take any of it seriously. At the beginning of the book, Mr. Campbell makes the point. He says, you don't read myths as stories. They contain eternal truths. There's an interesting part about the dichotomy of, do we watch the hero so that we can be like the hero, or do we watch the hero who goes to the other world, comes back and brings us some knowledge, as Prometheus did with fire, Moses did with the tablets, etc. I would like to say, if for an introduction to this kind of thing, it might be serviceable, but there are two defects. One, the language. Not only are the translations of the sacred texts preserved in a kind of flowery Victorian style aspect. The other thing is, it's written at a time when psychoanalysis was big news, so you get a lot of Freudian and, well, obviously Jungian is going to crop up with the archetypes and the collective unconscious, but that was all new stuff-ish back in the day. And he seems to cling to a lot of Freudian psychology, which has pretty much been thrown out along with the bathwater. But the actual writing of the book I didn't find entertaining at all. So despite having finished it and recognising the fact that it is a seminal book, I wouldn't really think you'd get much out of this unless you had to read it for a part of a course, or you might wish to find excerpts of some of the old myths that you weren't aware of before. Again, it's kind of wide-ranging, but not very wide-ranging. I do find that the same kind of peoples and their myths, although taken from all over the world, do tend to be repetitive. Not a wide enough sample, and I suspect that had the samples been wider, the theory would have crumbled even more.